Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the Florida City and County Management Association's webinar entitled Navigating Career Change. My name is Bob Lee, and I have the honor of serving as your host today. Joining me as co-host is Mr. Mike Ryko. Mike is employed with the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, and he's the person who you heard giving the countdown before today's program. But most importantly, Mike will be the person who will be assisting our attendees and us as panelists on today's webinar in terms of any technology needs that we may have. Sponsors for today's webinar include the Florida Institute of Government, the Florida League of Cities, the Center for Florida Local Government Excellence, FCCMA, the Florida City and County Managers Association, of course, and three corporate sponsors: Strategic Government Resources, Doug, thank you for participating today, Granicus, and Government Services Group. Collectively, these sponsors enable FCCMA to provide these webinars at no cost to attendees on a monthly basis. So again, we appreciate very much their support for this part of FCCMA's program. For those who have not participated in an FCCMA webinar before, and I see we have at least one student, Eddie, who signed in, welcome, from an ICMA student chapter. If you have not participated, I want to point you to one of our features. It's the chat box. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. And this is where you can send in a question that you may have for one or all of our presenters today. At this time, let me introduce who we have that is going to be serving as panelists for this topic. To the left is Derek Beecher, City Manager and Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Daytona Beach. Jim Hansen, retired City Manager of 41 years and Senior Advisor with ICMA and FCCMA. And Doug Thomas, Senior Vice President, Strategic Government Resources, as I mentioned previously, and also a longtime City Manager. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is ask each of you. Now, Jim will not be joining us by picture. He will be by voice only, but in this particular case, I think if one of us had to have just by voice only, it would be Jim, because he has this radio voice I always tell him about. So actually, this is appropriate for you, Jim. I think it makes the rest of us equal now in terms of our presentation. But Derek, why don't we start with you? I'd like to ask if you wouldn't mind just sort of summarizing your background for today's attendees, particularly for this topic. I think it's particularly appropriate.
Yes, thank you so very much. I am pleased to have the opportunity to serve on this panel with some great individuals who have been dedicated to serving in local government. I am Derek C. Fiatra, and I have the privilege of serving as the City Manager for the world's most famous beach, home to 6 colleges and universities, home to billion-dollar enterprises. I've been doing this since 2001, starting in my hometown of Winter Haven, where I served as City Manager in Winter Haven and served in that community for 14 years. And then I transitioned over to a sister city within Polk County, Haines City, and served there for 4 years as the City Manager, leading that community and helping to transform the very fabric of that city, where people were coming to live, work, and play. Had the opportunity to apply for a job here in Daytona Beach. Not really know if this would be the right fit, but it has been a perfect fit for me as I work with 900 plus employees about how do we redevelop and rebrand Daytona Beach, that it will become the community of choice and not just a option when people are deciding where they want to live, work, play, learn, and raise a family. So thank you for this opportunity. This has been my life's passion since I graduated from college. I'm at Bethune-Cookman, and so I'm back in Wildcat country here in Daytona Beach because this is where I came to college. So thank you for the opportunity, Bob.
Thanks, Derek. Jim, how about yourself? Could you summarize your background, please?
Sure. Well, first off, I apologize for my software here not working. I've got multiple webcams, but none of them seem to want to work today. But I've been a manager for 41 years, worked in Georgia and Florida, most recently, the cities in Florida up in the Jacksonville area. Retired in 2017, and I have been serving as a senior advisor most of the time since retiring. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, it's a volunteer position. We get no pay, but we do this to stay connected with the profession. We do a lot of coaching of managers, mentoring of new managers, supporting MITs. But most of where we spend our time now is recruiting and selection of managers for small cities and counties. We often call it being akin to missionary work for a lot of these little cities, some of which have never had a manager before, and they very desperately need some help. But we enjoy doing it. There's, I think, currently 8 of us across the state, and just a good way to stay connected with the profession.
Thanks, Jim. Doug?
Great. Well, like my colleagues here, I'm pleased to be part of today's presentation. And as I'm sitting here looking at the screen, I want to just make sure that everyone knows that who's looking to get into city management, you don't have to have the same barbers that Derek and Jim and I have. We all had hair when we started this profession a long time ago. Bob Lee is the one exception out there in this group that still has some hair in the midst of it. So that being the side part, no, I'm pleased to be part of today's presentation. I bring about 35 years of active city management experience in communities in Maryland, Michigan, and here in Florida. My last city was city manager of Lakeland, Florida, located in the central part of the state. So I've worked in a city as large as that, as complex as that, with close to 3,000 employees, but first started in this profession when I was an intern way back when, in a community almost about 1,200 in population, but spent a good portion of my career in those 15 to 20,000 populations as well. And I had the unique opportunity of joining SGR about 6 years ago. Then I had hired the firm to do some work with me, and one thing led to another, and the principal of the firm, who was a former city manager, he and I just kind of clicked in terms of our style and our management approaches, and gave me an opportunity to say, hey, what do you want to do for the next chapter? And I gave me an opportunity to sit and work for a variety of communities across the country, as opposed to just focusing on one.
Oh yeah, he's his colleague. Tell him I'm on a webinar with Jim.
In my background, beyond city management, what I do now in local government, I spent about half my time in executive recruitment across the country in various cities and communities and economic development agencies. I spend about a fourth of my time working with local governments in doing strategic planning, governance retreats, having councils work better collectively, also working with senior leadership development, do some mentoring of employees and managers, younger and older. And then the other fourth of my time is generally speaking in events such as this or at state and national conferences, just addressing best management practices and trends and issues taking place in local government.
Thanks, Doug. And I think as our attendees can see, we have an esteemed group here, very experienced in the profession. And the way we're going to do this today is we have 4 questions that we've prepared for the panelists, and they're open-ended questions. And they're going to take turns sort of leading off with these questions. But again, a reminder to attendees, as our presenters or panelists speak, if you do have any particular questions for any one of them, please don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A chat box. So with that, let's go to the first question. And Derek, I'd like you to lead us off. And for those who may be just listening but cannot see this webinar visually, because there is an option just to dial in if they're not with a near a laptop, I'm going to go ahead and read the question so you know what it is that they're addressing. And it is as follows. What are some of the tips, considerations for people aspiring to move into their first city county manager position? And that may be someone who's been experienced for many years as a deputy or director, or maybe they were career military, maybe they came right from the private sector, or they could be a relatively young professional and they have an opportunity to move into that position. So this is for a very broad audience. And Derek, I'm going to throw that question to you first.
Thanks, Bob. One of the things that I think is essential, when I started out in local government in 2001, I did have a great city manager leader. I learned what to do and what not to do from David Green, who's the city manager in Winter Haven. But one of the key things that I did was research successful communities and successful leaders and try to pattern and understand what did they do in their communities to make them successful and great leaders. And then I reached out to those individuals. I know Doug and I look the same age, but Doug was in Lakeland and Polk County where I was, and he was one of those individuals you can look towards of trying to figure out what to do, how to do it, and how do you move your communities forward. So really researching and finding out successful communities and successful leaders and trying to pattern yourself after them, and also contacting them to figure out some things that they would do and let them be mentors for you when you first started out. But also engaging the department leaders, colleagues, to see what did they do best. Also figuring out how could you offer your service and your expertise to the management team so they could see that you had an awareness of what they were doing and that you were thriving to be in that seat also. So really two things, finding someone that's successful that you could communicate with, you can contact and you can talk to, researching what makes their city successful, and then doing a lot of reading and engaging in conversations with people so you can have an awareness of what takes place in other departments within the organization.
Great answer. Thank you, Derek. Doug, would you take this question as well and add to or reaffirm whatever what Derek has covered?
Sure, thank you. In addition to what Derek has said, I agree wholeheartedly. You want to look at what we view as successful cities, innovative cities. What I have found in my years in this profession is we rarely invent something ourselves. We typically rob it from another community and tweak it to make it fit our own dynamics. And it's the fun part of this business where we can actually sit and watch what other communities are dealing with issues that may be similar but not necessarily identical. I'm going to approach this question a little bit from the standpoint in my recruiter role, is that because obviously I see thousands of candidates over the course of the year looking to get into this profession, and obviously work with a lot of councils and commissioners and governing bodies and what they're looking for in the managers. And they will vary from community to community, not surprisingly. But what I will tell those folks that are looking for this first time position when you want to become a manager, first and foremost, I suspect all of us that have been in the manager's role, at some point you get it in your system that you want your own city. You've been an assistant or you've been a department head or whatever the case would be, and it starts to just build on you that you're ready to kind of launch into the next stage of your career. And so when you get to that point, you'll know it. And I encourage you to make sure that you feel comfortable in that role when you do it, because those of us that have been assistant managers as well as managers, and those of us who have known a lot of assistant managers, many times the people in assistant roles have said it was the best job I ever had, because it is different in the point of the spear versus being an assistant or a department head, because it's your baby 24/7. So I always say, make sure you feel that you're ready personally, professionally, all that's the right time for you to move, because you've got to have an air of confidence in this business to be able to convey the stuff that will require you to do things successfully as a manager. From a preparation standpoint, what I will tell you is that we're seeing a lot of folks with this, all of us aging baby boomers that are moving out, the pig and the python, out of the system. And during the Great Recession, there used to be a lot of assistant positions, either assistant manager or assistant department head positions, and many of those got eliminated and quite frankly never came back. And so we see a lot of people that are moving into the roles of managers who may not have been an assistant in the past. And so they've got more of a focus of a particular department. And so what I would say is that obviously I always encourage folks to get as broad-based experience in this business as you're looking to become a manager, to make sure you understand operations from utilities to public works to finance to planning to zoning to community development, all the kind of arenas you got. And some department heads are more akin to that. We often see finance directors roll into the manager's position because they have to understand the totality of the city and how the numbers come together. They don't run those operations, but they certainly understand them. Same, in a similar vein, we see that happen a lot with community development and planners. When you think about the community development site plan review process, that's an element that touches so many different departments that they have a natural understanding of their effort. But there are certainly other departments that allow you to move into this role. But if you're in a position where even if you're an assistant or an administrative assistant looking to get into it, or you're a department head, the other element that I really encourage you to look at is to try to get experience in working with boards. Boards and commissions. So if you can be a board liaison, obviously planning directors or community development directors often are the liaison to planning and zoning boards. That board dynamic is a skill set that you will need as a manager. And the more experience you get in the role as an assistant or department head in helping to work with those boards and commissions is something that I really encourage you to consider. So to leave it that so that Jim has a chance to chat as well on this question.
Thanks, Doug. Jim?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I would tell aspiring young folks that in a move to a manager's position, you need to expect that it's going to be a lot different. Even if you sat in a lot of the meetings and even participated, I think you will find, and I've heard this from so many people, that it is a real shock that when all of a sudden you're the center of public scrutiny, and of course you are for anything that happens in your city. If anybody messes something up, you're the one they're going to complain about or to. So you get a lot of criticism. There's a lot of stress. And I'd say first, expect some of that, but there's a lot of reward too in doing well for a community. I certainly agree with building a strong resume, a base volunteer. Tell your boss you want to be assigned in different places so that you can get different experiences. I think that's very helpful. I think it's appropriate for managers to spend a good bit of time with their staff, particularly their assistants that are educated and looking to move on in the future, to sit down occasionally with them and quietly just explain their viewpoint of what happened. A lot of times, if you just sit in the meeting, you may not realize all that's going on behind the scenes. I found that it's good to sit down with people often the morning after the meeting and say, hey, this is really what was going on. This was the dynamic, or maybe this is why I wouldn't say that. Have a chance to have a very open discussion with these people, because you can learn a lot that way. And I think a manager owes it to their top staffers if they want that kind of insight to share it with them. So that's important. And last, I'd say, like the Boy Scouts, be prepared. Stuff happens, and I know I got to be an interim manager instantly one morning. Some of you have heard this story. When I was in a city that had the electric and gas systems, had a big ice storm. Everybody was out of power, about 25,000 people. It was in the 20s that morning. Everybody was cold. All the industries were shut down, and I got to our utility building, and as I was walking in the door, they were carrying my boss out. He had a stroke that morning, and I remember one of the people carrying him out looked at me on the way out and said, "You're it." And I didn't leave that building for 3 days, trying to help where I could, keep the council appraised of what was going on, talking to the industrial leaders so they'd get some idea when they might get power back, and help answer the phone and do whatever I could. But things can happen unexpectedly. Your boss can take another job, could maybe get fired. It could be a medical issue that you'd be expected to step up, and you just need to be prepared to do it. And absolutely, if that opportunity comes up, give it everything you got to try to do a good job for your community.
Thanks, Jim. Those are all really good tips. I made notes about the importance of having a network of people to work with that you talked about, Derek, and the learning all different aspects that you can from the profession as much as you can, and that Doug highlighted. And of course, the preparation and learning from the manager that you're working with in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, Jim, that you talked about, I think is very, very important as well. I would like to add just one other one, and that one has to do with sort of doing a self-assessment of what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. You're going into this position, you're going to be tested by people. So as you're applying and about to move into the CEO of a municipality or a county, a local government of some type, it's important for you to know a lot about yourself, and because character is going to eat planning and preparation for garbage every day. I mean, they're going to eat it for breakfast. I mean, it's a far second. So you have to know yourself and what you're willing to do. And but I think all these tips combined really appreciate your insight to those attendees today. Why don't we go on to the second question? And Doug, I think I'm going to ask if you could take this one first. What are some of the tips and considerations for managers who desire to move on to another city county manager position? So they're already a manager. And this, maybe we can make this Florida specific too, because I think that may have some other considerations. But what are the tips and considerations, particularly what you've been doing the last 6 years, that you can guide managers who desire to move to another position?
Sure. First and foremost, I would tell candidates that are thinking about moving on to the next opportunity to be very strategic in your locations that you're looking for. Now, in some cases, you may be aspiring to come, and it may be within the state of Florida, and there certainly are very outstanding communities that a lot of folks will aspire to move into. But I think you've got to also look at it from a couple different standpoints. One is size. You want to get a sense of, because the dynamics are different in a community that's a smaller 2,000 or 3,000 population than a 15,000 to 20,000 population versus a 50,000 population versus those that are over 100,000. And I will tell you, I'm kind of a unique manager. I moved from a community of about 15,000 to Lakeland, and Lakeland at that time was about 75,000. And that was a pretty good shift. And when I left, it was close to 100,000. Most managers don't make that type of move, but from my background, I had worked for cities that were the largest cities in a given county, and we regionalized provided services. And I will tell you that scale does matter, that you have to understand that process, but I will also tell you that you manage a city differently if you're in a city of Derrick's size or a Lakeland than you are in a community of 15 or 20,000. You no longer have a couple hundred employees, so you know everybody's name and their kids and everybody else. Now all of a sudden you're managing a process that's much more complex, and you spend a whole lot more time with your elected officials managing that aspect of the business and less of the day-to-day details of the operation. So that takes a different mindset, and some folks stay in positions of 10 to 15 to 20,000 or 30,000 their whole careers, and that's fine. That's where they're at, and they're very comfortable in it. Others have a desire to move into more complex systems to press themselves professionally and personally and to go through. So be deliberate about what you're looking to do. And I would also say that we in this business see a lot of folks that apply for virtually every position that becomes available. We call them frequent flyers in our business. And that really doesn't bear well. Most recruiters, if you're in a firm, will see that pretty regularly, and you'll get a sense of whether or not they're just kind of applying for the sake of it versus if they're applying for a good reason. So I always tell candidates to be very strategic about where you want to be, the type of community you want to be, the geographic location, and the size. First and foremost, don't just think I'm ready for the next one and just start applying everywhere, because your reputation will start to get tarnished in that regard. So first and foremost, be very, very strategic. Second of all, what I think is extremely helpful, that when I see candidates applying from all over the country for different size communities, I'm looking at their background and trying to get a sense of what's a good fit. And so what I say first and foremost, if you're working with a recruiter or if the city's developed a brochure like most of the recruiting firms do, they're going to be very deliberate about the challenges and issues and opportunities that you're looking at that are going to be likely facing the next manager. And I can spot a mile away a cover letter and a resume that has no idea what they've applied for. And so I think in today's day and age, you ought to be able to look at that. There's a lot of time and effort, and councils take a lot of emotional energy in approving a brochure that identifies their community and their challenges and issues. If your cover letter and your resume says nothing about any of those issues, I guarantee you that's a strike against you on day one. I don't care how good of a manager you are. You haven't presented yourself to the unique positions that they're looking at. So first and foremost, be strategic of what you're looking for. Second of all, read the material. If there is a recruiter, call the recruiter, talk to he or she, and get a sense of what the dynamics are, because you can't fit everything into it. And then very much fine tune your background and why you are interested in this position and why your skill sets are a match to this particular position. And lastly, I also say, because for Florida, we tend to attract a lot of candidates from the rest of the part of the country that want to come to Florida, and we have to help decipher whether they just want to come to retire or they want to come because of the professional opportunity. And so I always encourage candidates to, beyond outlining their background experience and their insight into the unique positions that's at hand in the given community, to also tell us why. If I'm moving from Arkansas to California, or I'm moving from Michigan to Florida, tell me why. Councils are interested in that stuff, as we are as recruiters. And it may be you've got aging parents or kids or grandparents, or used to live in the area, but it just isn't apparent. I know it may sound corny, but that's important stuff to know. And it's not so much for us just as recruiters. I will tell you, elected officials read that stuff. They look at your cover letter and they want to know why you want to move from one state to Florida. And having that story about, hey, I grew up there, I had kids there, I've got aging, whatever that looks and feels like, to do it appropriately and professionally, of course, but fill in the gaps, because 9 times out of 10 elected officials will fill in the gaps and they'll be incorrect. So I say be very deliberate about it.
Thanks, Doug. Jim?
Well, Doug's hit several of probably the most important points. And obviously, he's in that business and knows what those points are. I just had a few things to add here. One, have a clear chronological resume with the dates and all the jobs that you've had. You would be surprised the number of resumes that we see that show vacant dates. They decide not to show various jobs they've had. They didn't state what college they got a degree from, or they have gaps in their resumes. All that looks pretty bad. I might note that under ICMA ethics guidelines, you are required to put, when you put forth a resume, you need to put forth a complete resume. You can't hide or leave out certain jobs. You're probably going to be found out that that's happened. It's going to make you look pretty bad. Everybody understands that some city managers wind up having a gap between one job and the next because a lot of people get fired, and that's part of the profession. But be clear and concise with it. And I guess the other thing I'd point out is, I guess Doug and I sort of do the same thing for different size cities. Senior advisors, we never take a city over 10,000, and most of them are much smaller than that. I say multiple short tenures look bad on resumes, both to an elected group and to people that are involved in recruiting. ICMA says the average, or the minimum time you should spend in a job as a manager is 2 years. That's a minimum. I would think that my personal view is I'd like to see people with averages in their jobs of 4 years plus. Someone that thinks they can just skip between jobs every year or two, and they're applying, as Doug said, for everything under the sun, are not real impressive, because they're not going to do by jumping jobs very quickly, they're not going to do a very good job for whatever city they're trying to move to. So I'd encourage people to stay in a community long enough to do a decent job for them before you apply to the next one. And sometimes they're extenuating circumstances, but make sure what you're submitting is clear.
Thanks, Jim. Derek?
Yeah, this is a very unique question for me, since I just got hired here in Daytona Beach on June 1st. One of the key things when I decided that I wanted to move on from the city of Haines City, which was treating me extremely well, did not have major issues. We were a thriving community. When I started my career, I had 3 places really I wanted to be a city manager in. I knew in 2001 I wanted to be the city manager of my hometown, which was Winter Haven. The other city was Daytona Beach, because I did my undergraduate work here in Daytona Beach. And the other city was Savannah, Georgia, because I love going into that community to travel. Now, I think one of my employees is on the line here in Daytona. I'm not going to Savannah. They just hired someone. I'm actually happy here in Daytona Beach. But I was strategic, knowing the positions that I wanted and evaluating where would be my next step. And when the job notice came open for Daytona Beach, and then I had a phone call from one of the recruiters. I studied this community extremely close. I understood what took place when the previous city manager, Jim Chisholm, came here many years ago, and what the city looked like and what had been done, and evaluated what were the needs of the city. I actually came and visited the community on 2 weekends, and acted like I was just a regular resident or a regular visitor to the area, asking questions of the waiters and the servers at the restaurants. I'm walking in the neighborhoods, just like I was looking for a new house or something like that, because I wanted to know not only am I a good fit for Daytona Beach, but is Daytona Beach a good fit for me? So often we look at job opportunities, we look at salaries, we look at the potential for going from a community that has 30,000 residents to one that has 80,000. But sometimes a great pay and a larger community is really not the right fit for you. So I wanted to make sure that this was the right fit for me, that I was going to be adding value to the community. And so I think you need to do that, as all of the panelists have stated about some of the things that you need to do with your resume, with the profession, evaluating the workloads and the community. You really need to make sure it is a right fit for you and you're a right fit for them. And when you make that decision, have an assurance that you are one of the best candidates for the job, because you always know that the potential is there for the current group that you're working for to be a little concerned that you're trying to run away from them, and why it's the reasoning you're running. So make sure you have the confidence that you can provide value to that community. And I was able to relay that message and communicate that out of the 62 applicants that applied for Daytona Beach or went through the system, that I was the perfect fit because I understood the community. I knew what the community needed at the time, and I believe that I brought value to them and was able to lay out the transformative leadership that I could bring to the table. And I think that they were able to see that because of me having conversations with the community, going back and listening and watching some of the interactions of the elected officials, what were their goals and objectives over the past 4 or 5 years. And I was able to show strategically how we could accomplish those things that maybe the previous city manager was trying to get through the system and he was not able to do before his retirement. And so that's the thing, studying the community, understanding the community, and if you have the ability to travel to the community, which I did because I was right in Polk County in Central Florida, and be a regular citizen, be a regular person trying to find out what is best about that community before you move. But really just studying the community, reading about the community, reading the local newspapers, listening to some of the, if they have podcasts or anything of that nature. Those are key things and tips that you should look at as you try to transition to another city or county manager position. And just don't do it. I've learned not to do it just for the money or for a larger population or staff, but you've got to also make sure that the city you're trying to go to will be a right fit for not only you, but for the family that you're bringing with you if you have a family.
Great advice. I don't know, Doug, Jim, if you want to add any more to that, but great advice, Derek.
Yeah, the only other piece that I would add, just because this question is gearing up for people who are looking to get into the next position, it is amazing to me, the more I have worked in this position with SGR, how poorly many of our colleagues do in telling what they do. I see resumes that look like job descriptions. And that's the last thing a council wants to look at. Is everyone knows, now it will vary from city to city a little bit, but generally speaking, your role as a city manager is going to be pretty comparable. But I'm amazed at the number of professionals that have been in this business a long time, when they submit a resume, they basically tell us their roles and responsibilities as a manager. And that's not what you want to do. You should be selling yourself in terms of the things that you've accomplished, the things you're most proud of, the things that help move the bar, how you've been transformative and done innovative things. That's what councils and governing bodies and recruiters are looking to see, not that I prepare a budget, I do this, I do that, I do. And I always, when I get to this point, I always want to remind folks, take a hard look at that and say, am I selling myself or am I simply saying what I do? And there's a distinguishing factor between the two. And if you're only doing a job description, it's hard to get to that next step. And so really take a hard look at how you're presenting and selling yourself in terms of that innovations and the things that are bold and that you're most proud of. The things that you want to talk about with your counsels when you're being evaluated ought to be the things you ought to be probably putting on your resume as well.
Thanks, Doug. Jim, anything else before we move on to the next question?
No, I think this one's been covered.
I think so too. And I really like the emphasis on being strategic that I heard in different ways from all three of you, that you just don't send a resume out, you prepare for it. And just one final point that I've seen successful with managers is when they are interviewing for that next job, if they can say, this is the only interview, this is the only job application I've sent out, that seems to imply something very powerful as well, that they have been strategic and they are perhaps genuine, as Derek is talking about, genuinely interested in that position. Is if you are in a position that you can say, this is the only job that I've applied for. I'm happy where I'm at. Here's why, as Doug's talking about, and Jim telling your story, why I've applied for this position. Let's move on to the next question, third question. And Jim, I'm going to ask if you can take this one first. You've, I think, chaired this committee and also a past president of FCCMA. And I know this has been something, a committee that's been very important to you. But what tips and considerations can be offered? This is the Committee of Managers in Transition. What tips and considerations can be offered to managers in transition in terms of the discussion that we're having today?
Okay, well, thanks, Bob. I might note I've been in transition twice in my 41 years in this business, and your perception or your take on it is much different depending on what stage of life you're in. When you're young and you have kids in school and a mortgage to pay, then it can be a pretty scary time. If you're a little bit older and have some money in the bank and not too far from retirement, you can take it a lot more relaxed in how you're going about it. I guess I'd say first, don't take it personally. There are a lot of managers that get fired, oftentimes with new councils. If you can understand that obviously new people running for election are often going to be opposing the people that are in office right now. So if they're ideologically opposed to those people, they're probably ideologically opposed to their manager too. So it's one of the reasons you get fired is just a new elected body wants their own person. So reminds me of that old saying about managers, there are only two kinds of managers, those that have been fired and those that are going to be. So be ready. Second, I'd say be very, very careful as you're leaving a community not to burn your bridges and create negative stories. Expect any prospective employer to Google your last places to work, and if you wound up with some negative comments back and forth, that's not going to look very well. You should leave with your head up, unless, of course, you get allegations like as if you stole some money or something like that, where you have to defend yourself. But if it's the normal sort of thing, the council members just don't think you're up to one thing or another, the right way to leave is with your head up and say, thank you for letting me work here. And I hope the community, I wish the community the best. Stand up and walk out with your head high, and don't throw mud at anybody, because it'll only make your future job hunt a lot harder. Next, I'd remind people to plan on the job hunt taking some time, depending on how many places you're willing to look at. You could easily be 6 months to a year or more in looking for your next job. ICMA used to recommend, I guess they still do, that each manager should have about 6 months worth of salary in the bank other than your retirement accounts, so that you're not pressed so much if you do find yourself out of work that you feel like you have to jump out and take the first job that is available. And on that note, I agree very much with what Derek had just said in the previous question. Don't just jump at any opening. There are a number of cities that have such a great history of manager turnover. These are probably places you don't want to be. You should do your homework and understand what the situation is in each of these cities. Some places are just not good places to work. Many of them are great places, but make sure that, you feel like they fit you, and do your homework, and reflect that, of course, in your resume and your cover letter. But do your homework. A couple other points very quickly. It seems like many of us who've been in the business a long time, you work a lot of hours, and you recall a time when somebody sent an email to you or called you and said, "Old such and such passed on." And I don't know, for me, so many times I've said, "Darn, I really wanted to spend some time with them, or reconnect with them, or talk with them," and you realize you've been too busy. If you find yourself in transition and you have some time, it is an excellent time to reconnect with both family members, friends, and old colleagues, just because, frankly, we've worked so darn many hours that oftentimes, if you wait until the next time you have that opportunity, a lot of them may not be here anymore. So it's a good time to take care of yourself and reconnect with the world. And last, I'd say, stay connected with your colleagues. After the first week or two, all the calls that you get and emails will start tapering off, and all of a sudden you'll start to feel alone. Reach out, stay connected with your colleagues in the business. Go to the regional meetings with other managers and colleagues. Basically, it's good for your mental health, and it will oftentimes help you find opportunities or find information about cities that may be open that you're interested in, and help you do your homework for deciding where you want to apply next. So those are a few points I've got. I'd leave some time for Doug and Derek to respond.
Thanks, Jim. And I apologize, folks. I didn't realize my audio was still on. My dog decided to pull my wires out of the socket, so I had to leave just for momentarily. I apologize for that.
We didn't hear you.
You could or couldn't?
We couldn't hear you.
Thank you. Derek, go ahead, please.
I was in a particular situation where I was a manager in transition, and I was doing exactly what was just stated. I did not get upset about it. In this profession, at any point in time, every 2 weeks, you know that you can, unless it's once a month, you could be on the chopping block in some form of a fashion. In Winter Haven, had new commissioners come in. A freshman commissioner decided that the city needed to go in a new direction. At the end of the meeting, I thank them for allowing me the opportunity to serve my community, for my hometown, for 14 years. After about 120 people came and spoke at the meeting about why it's important to keep me as city manager, from the president of the state college to the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, I knew that in this profession, at any time, I could be terminated without cause or with cause. But this one was just a new commission came in and decided they wanted to go in another direction. And I decided to applaud them for the work that we had done, applaud the city, the staff members. I think that if I would have been negative about it or engaged in a back and forth with the local press, I would not have been able to go into a sister city right in Polk County and get a city manager job in less than 6 months. And so I stayed positive because I knew that I signed up for this, and that propelled me to the position I'm in right now here in Daytona Beach, Florida. So I think if you don't have a job opening right now, or you can't find some, offer your expertise to other managers to provide service in a interim capacity if you want to get right back into it. I think offering your assistance to local governments may get you in the door in other communities. And so that learn a lot, offer up your expertise, be positive about the situation, and don't just jump for the job that's just going to pay you. Really look and see where you can be a benefit to the community and if it's the right fit for you. But the key thing is to see if there is opportunities for you to offer assistance to other municipalities or other groups. And if you have the terminal degrees or graduate degrees, to see if there's availability for you to teach at a college or offer your assistance in that role during that transition time.
Thanks, Derek. Good advice as well, you and Jim. Doug, your thoughts, please.
Sure. I often speak when I'm working with councils about going through a search process, and they often say, well, don't bring us anybody that's got any baggage. And we say, well, you just probably eliminated about 80% of the managers out there, because if they're doing anything, they've got some sort of baggage, because that means they're doing something. So we often will tell them that managers are hired and fired with enthusiasm, or rarely by the same boards. You can walk on water with one board and find yourself out of service the next council election that takes place. And so to the extent that you haven't done anything wrong, illegal, immoral, or something of that nature, it is part of the profession, as mentioned as well. So I'm going to put in some plugs in terms of some things that the FCCMA does, and actually a unique partnership that we have with FCCMA. I have not been through transition, but I have had a whole heck of a lot of my friends and colleagues that have. And so I really tried to do what I can to help out, even when I was an active manager, to managers that were in transition, to reach out and talk to them and keep them supportive. If you know nothing about this profession, it is a network. And it is a relationship-based network. And so we really do, as an association, as colleagues in this profession, need to reach out, because but for the grace of God, any of us could be in that position for any given Monday or Tuesday after a meeting. And so I encourage, first and foremost, to stay plugged in with your network. And I encourage those of you listening, if you are not at MIT and you know someone that is, pick up that phone, send that email, reach out and talk to them, not just in the first couple of weeks, but as Derek said, down the road, because those calls, they do get a little bit lonely out there. And so please help your profession out by doing that. FCCMA has a good program. In fact, there'll be a presentation at the ICMA conference about some of the things that FCCMA is doing. So in addition to providing on our website, there's a tool for resources that are available to folks. If you haven't looked at that, look at it, because there's certain things such as free registration, waiver of fees for conferences and events to go through. Above and beyond that, SGR, when I joined, I wanted to help out MITs as well, and we worked out a partnership with FCCMA, and so we provide some additional free training, access to programs, IOP assessments, and just kind of a regular reach out to sign up for job blasts so they can be aware of opportunities. So there are resources that are out there available to you if you're an MIT and thinking about, what's my next stop in the process. So I encourage you to visit the website for that effort. As it relates to looking for the next position, in addition to trying to stay actively engaged, many times there are projects and things that you can do, even if you're not being paid, that will keep you in the game, so to speak, and keep you engaged and keep you out there in the business. And I encourage you to look at that stuff, as opposed to, I know going through a job search is a lot of work, especially when you're out of work and you're looking at multiple positions. But to the extent that you can stay engaged, that certainly is helpful. The other piece that I want to highlight, and I think Derek had mentioned this as well as Jim, don't feel, to the extent you can, don't feel compelled to jump to the first opportunity if it's not the right opportunity. Managers that go through transitions can survive them. But if they jump from one bad opportunity to the next bad opportunity to the next bad opportunity, eventually that will hurt you professionally. And it will be very, very hard to get into that upper tier echelon type of community, because if you go through too many transitions, then they're going to say, is it me? Is it the candidate, or is it the communities? And one or two you can do if they're done. But if you start jumping from one to the other to the other to the other too rapidly, it will hurt you professionally, and certainly will have an impact on your ability to land a quality position going forward. So be very careful. I realize that you got to keep the income stream coming through in some way, shape, or form, but don't feel obliged to take that first one if all the spider senses are tingling in your background to say, this is not the right spot, and I'm going to find myself right back where I started from in 6 or 8 or 9 months again later.
Very good advice, Doug. Gentlemen, before we move on to the fourth question, we actually have a question that's come in from one of our attendees, and I think it's a very helpful question for a number of people who will be viewing today's webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and read the question, and it is as follows. In the digital age, and with the ease of access to information for prospective employers, how might an inspiring assistant or deputy manager further their professional brand and digital footprint without overstepping their boundaries with respect to their manager and elected officials? Any of you want to weigh in on that question?
Well, Bob, I can, one thought I have is volunteer to be involved in ever increasing projects in your community. And some of those may, and even to make the presentation to your elected body, if it ultimately comes to that. And you may wind up then being quoted in a positive sense in your local media as being, you know, the one behind the XYZ project that turned out so great.
Thanks, Jim. Derek?
Yeah, I actually, this individual, Drew Driscoll, is my deputy city manager and fire chief here in Daytona Beach, which I'm telling you, he will be a city manager somewhere. It's just a matter of when. And so really, his digital footprint will continue to expand here in Daytona Beach because he has a very good wealth of knowledge. I will always communicate to anyone beyond him about that make sure that you're able to provide value to your manager and provide value to the elected officials. And remember that you're not the elected officials, that you are the support staff. But I am one who's a digital leader, and I believe in that digital footprint. And so utilizing your skills and resources to write for publications, to write for different entities, to provide insight on what we're doing in our community, and make sure that you also show that the elected officials support this, as Jim was saying, where you can get recognized in the local media, in the local profession, in FCCMA or ICMA. I think that's how you can expand the digital footprint, but also make sure that it's a collaborative effort, that you're not just doing this on your own, but it is part of the vision, the goals, and objectives of your elected officials, as well as your manager, who is the chief administrative officer for the organization. I think that will happen. And so he's also doing that right here and trying to expand his digital footprint. So if anybody's out there, Doug, if you do have a role, I don't want you to snatch him now unless it's a really good role, because he is providing great value to Daytona Beach.
Duly noted, Derek. Great suggestions as well. I'll jump in here, Bob, as well. To the extent that you, even if you're an assistant or an assistant to, and you're trying to kind of expand that effort, or you're a department head, a couple things to do. Number one, as Derek suggested, stay plugged into your association. Maybe you can be part of a panel, maybe you can be part of a group, a presentation, whatever that case would be, that kind of gets your name and gets your story out there in a way that helps promote the profession as a whole. I think speaks very highly. Serving on boards and committees and serving in your association, in addition to serving in leadership roles and nonprofits in your home communities. That's another element. Most of our councils want, you know, if there's a line I almost have in virtually every brochure, it's a manager has to feel comfortable in being part of the fabric of the community. That means you're not just doing the job of the city manager or the assistant city manager. It means you're giving back through boards and commissions and activities and other programs in your community. So to the extent that you do that, I think speaks well and will advance your career. The other thing I want to say is with a bit of caution, and I'll give you an insight from our standpoint when we go through a recruitment process. As you move through a semifinalist to the finalist, by the time you're a finalist, we actually have people on our staff that spend, and somebody who's been in the profession 25 or 30 years could have 300-400 pages worth of media coverage. And that's social media, that's newspaper articles, that's TV stations, that's blogs, that's a little bit of everything. And we do that to highlight, because we know that the constituents in whatever community are going to do everything they can to find everything they can about you. And we all love and know in Florida, that's so much easier than some other states because of the nature of what we do here in Florida. But the nature of that is that be sensitive, because your Facebook post, your Twitter post, your Instagrams, all that stuff is out there. And once it's out there, it doesn't get erased. And candidates are going to have to explain that when they've been out there and kind of been too far out there on either social or political issues. They just have to recognize that in the role of city management, we give up some things about what we can really kind of weigh in on, because we can't really separate who we are as a city manager versus our personal persona. And so be very sensitive about what that looks and feels like out there, because it will certainly, I have seen candidates not overcome some problems that they've had on social media and otherwise because they've been out there too far in some issues. And this gets to the point of being strategic. If you're looking to apply to a fairly purplish community versus a pretty die-hard red community, those social media posts will come back to haunt you, and they'll say this isn't our person, because they just are of the different mindset. So be sensitive about doing your promotion and the advocacy for the profession in a very professional way that doesn't box you into some corners down the road.
Really good advice, Doug. Derek, Jim as well. We only have about 5 minutes left for our final question. Drew, thank you for that question. I think that was timed perfectly in terms of our discussion. Doug, I'm going to ask you to start off with addressing this final question. What tips and considerations can be offered to managers interested in a career after city and county management?
Yeah, I'm probably the poster child on that one, because I had been in the business for 35 years and was starting to get contacted by a variety of communities and a variety of companies when I was in Lakeland, and nothing really kind of felt right. And so when the opportunity that came with SGR, it just was an organic opportunity. And I remember when Ron Holofield, the principal, the founder of SGR, and asked me, he said, well, you know, what do you want to do in the next chapter? And I said, well, I figured when I retired, I would get into some sort of consulting. I really truly cherished this profession, and all the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything came with it. It's just really been just a very rewarding opportunity to be part of communities. And but I said, I'm not ready to retire. I said, I got 8 to 10 years before I'm thinking about it. He says, no, I'm talking about what do you want to do now? And I said, well, what does that look like? So he gave me the opportunity to say, you can come on board on a full-time basis and do all the things that you want to do, and none of the crazy things that comes with us being city managers and getting those phone calls at 2 and 3 in the morning and saying, what does that look like? And, why did we did this? Or, what were they going through their minds, and dealing with the media and everything else. And so, my opportunity presented itself really just through engaging of a firm that ultimately led to a relationship with the principal of the firm that said, hey, you do a lot as a manager. What are the things you're passionate about? So I've always felt that I hired well, and I always felt that I was always very big in strategic planning and visioning and pushing the envelope and how we can do things differently. I enjoyed the policy standpoint of local government. And so working with councils and helping them build consensus and finding common grounds and building team, and the other element was building the next generation. This has been a great profession for me, so how could I help someone out? So in my case, it really kind of fell into my lap to say, hey, I could do consulting on a full-time basis for 8 to 10 years. And at some point, I'll ratchet back like some of my other colleagues in SGR and do it as a consultant, and just pick and choose where and when and the type of projects I want to work with. So right now, I feel like a kid in a candy store. It's been a fun opportunity to move on, and it just is. I just feel blessed that I could do the things that I really feel passionate about, helping the business and helping the profession and helping the next generation. So I will tell you, it's an interesting transition. I took about 3 months of yes, no, and maybe, and thinking about, is this really what I want to do right now? And talked to a lot of friends and colleagues that went into consulting and went into the private sector, some that liked it, some that hated it, some that went back out and got back into the profession. And so I basically said, I'll give you a 2-year commitment, Ron, and if I don't like it, I won't leave you in the lurch. And, that was 6 years ago, and I'm still rocking and rolling. So it's a fun opportunity. So what I will tell you is that, though, as in the role that I play, even though I'm doing it on a full-time basis, when I'm meeting with councils or meeting with staff and learning about the organization, I encounter a lot of department heads and a lot of managers. And there are other opportunities that you can do this type of work on a part-time basis. We have interim managers. We just placed our 200th interim manager just this month. And those are folks that are 30, 60, 90, 180 days in a community, either in their home state or somewhere else, and there's a way to make that work. So people that still like the business, a lot of our former managers become interim managers, and they love it because it's not theirs, forever. They're there to kind of keep the wheels in the wagon, and they can provide insight and help a community stay stabilized. There are a lot of firms that do that work. There are also we have a lot of folks that work in our interim and consulting arena where they want to do a special project. Maybe they were, a public works director, and they can do an organizational analysis or a fee study or whatever that looks and feels like. don't undersell the skill sets you have as a manager in this profession. The diversity of skills you got are very, very transferable. And there are opportunities either as interims, as consultants, or as part-time, people on projects and issues. And Jim's got a great gig as well when he retired to do, the senior leadership or the senior advisor program. I really enjoy that opportunity to be at this stage of my career and working with a lot of younger professionals and colleagues and helping them work through their challenging issues. So don't sell yourself short. There's a ton of opportunity, and if anybody wants to talk to me, offline about what that looks and feels like, or either consulting or otherwise, I'm more than glad to have that conversation with you, because there's some good opportunities, and you can stay engaged at the pace of which you want to.
Thanks for sharing that, Doug, and thanks for what you do for the profession and continue to do. We're about 3 o'clock, but I would like Jim and Derek for you each to weigh in on this question, if you would also. So Jim, would you mind adding something or any information you want to share that Doug has already covered, or something different?
Well, just a couple of points real quickly. I know we're running late. First, don't be afraid to try new things. There's an old quote that life shrinks or expands according to your level of courage. I think a lot of people may not have the courage to try new things. And secondly, I think you need to be for something, that you have to care about something. I think a lot of us have a lot to provide to the profession. I think, Bob, your example may be excellent in that you were a manager before, and now you've gotten into basically training for managers. You understand what their needs are. You provide a tremendous service for the FCCMA and for managers, and I think that's a good example of using the skills that you developed before to do some good for somebody in the future. And as you get in your later stages of life, you have to feel like you're worth something. You're not just an old war horse that's been put out to pasture. I mean, you're there and you've got some skills and you should use them.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. Derek, final thoughts.
3 words: retire, retreat, and refocus. So don't leave the profession until you retire. It's the greatest profession in the world. And once you retire, retreat for a little bit, retreat from government, retreat into the mountains, then refocus, and then decide if you want to do something else.
For all you attendees out there, if you can't see the big smile on Derek's face, that by itself evidences that he's actually in the arena right now, and he's enjoying himself. So there's a lot of rewards in being in this profession. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking your time to share your insights with FCCMA members today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the FCCMA board for continuing to provide these webinars for their membership. We also appreciate the Professional Development Committee. They put these webinar ideas and panelists together, and they do that on time that they find in their busy schedules as well. So we appreciate them. Finally, we want to acknowledge those who participated today as attendees. Appreciate you taking the time, and appreciate the question that came in as well from Drew. With that, I guess we're now adjourned. Thank you all for your participation. And in just a couple seconds, an evaluation is going to pop up. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment just to complete that, FCCMA would appreciate it very much. Gentlemen, thanks again.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.